Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Lunch Bites, 15-minute technology webinars. Today's topic is Enhanced Labor Entry, which is one of our add-ons for Sage 500 ERP. We're going to be talking about how this application can help you streamline labor entry with rapid grid entry, batch transaction processing, and data validation rules. So we developed Enhanced Labor Entry basically to prevent the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. Right? When we're doing labor entry, there are a lot of times when we can make errors. We've actually had customers in the past that instead of entering the quantity produced, they entered the work order number. Well, as you can imagine, that could be pretty problematic. You know, if I'm really trying to produce, let's say, 15 items and I enter the work order number and it's 1,050, big problem there. We're putting a lot more inventory in than we really actually made. We could potentially then have backflush steps against that, which is really going to mess up our raw material inventory, as well as our costing. So lots of problems with labor entry if we don't have some rules in place to prevent that data entry from being validated. This also ties into lean manufacturing technologies and strategies. Things like poka-yoke or poka-yoke, which is a Japanese term meaning mistake proofing or error proofing. And what we've done really with enhanced labor entry is given you as a user the ability to kind of implement some of these within your manufacturing process. So let's talk about really kind of the heart of the application, which is the labor validation rules. And what this does is it validates your transactions against run, setup, and downtime against the standards that you've defined within the routing. Okay? You can then pick variables which are used to compare against those routing definitions, including material. We can also cascade rules. So, for example, maybe we want to make sure that at least 90% of the material required has been issued before going to the next step. We can actually do that in three ways. We can either warn you and say, hey, we're plus or minus 10%, maybe 10% more than or 10% less than what the routing or the work order required. So we're going to warn you and then allow you to proceed. Or we're going to require a supervisor override to approve that transaction from being entered. Or we can prevent that transaction from happening altogether. Okay? This application is also very useful for after-the-fact labor entry in grids instead of labor entry screen. We're going to take a look at that here in a little bit. And entering labor transactions in batches where you can review them, make sure all the information is correct before posting it, and try to catch those data entry errors before they get into the system. So this is the labor rule validation screen where we would actually set up the rules. You basically assign a rule ID, a description, and then all the parameters defining the rule. And we're going to walk through this. So one of the first things we need to do is pick a variable. So we can measure against multiple variables in the routing. For example, the one highlighted here is the previous work order step complete. So that means that if we're setting up this rule, we want to make sure that the previous work order step was in fact completed. Reasons this might be useful is I want to make sure that I've issued material before I actually start doing labor. And then we have our evaluation options, and we can evaluate that rule based on multiple conditions or evaluations, you know, greater than, less than, equal to, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. You know, really those are the evaluation options that we have for the rules. And then on the exception types, really these are kind of the steps or the things that we can take action on. One is just to have a warning pop up and say, hey, this falls outside of kind of the norm, so are you sure you want to process this labor transaction, or do you want to review it, make changes, and then post it? Okay. Do we want to override? And that's going to create a security event in Sage 500 and require somebody with supervisor permissions to override that transaction and allow it to be entered? Or do we want to exclude it altogether? Because, I mean, if we only require 100 pieces to be issued for a particular work order, and somebody's all of a sudden trying to enter a transaction for maybe 1,000 pieces, that's way over the norm. requires 100, you're trying to enter 1,000, there's a problem here. We can exclude that transaction so that it cannot be put into the system. The rules can also have some different options on how you apply them. One of those options is you can check to make sure that the rule only applies to those labor transactions that are checked as completed for the work order step. So that means the rule would only be applicable if the work order step is being marked as complete. Okay? Reasons for this: if the work order step is complete, you probably don't want anybody posting more labor or material transactions to that step. So we can prevent that until they mark it as not completed. Then they could go back and post those transactions. We can also check to make sure that the rule only applies to labor transactions for work order progress steps. As we all know, that labor progress step has caused problems for years, and that's really because when we're progressing out of work in process, we're putting finished goods inventory into our system. Okay? So if I'm entering incorrectly maybe a transaction for 100 units when I should have been doing it for 10 units, and it's on that labor transaction, labor progress transaction, I want to make sure that I'm validating that rule, because what if I only really wanted to put in 10, but I fat-fingered that extra 0 and tried to put in 100. That falls out of the norm. I can now get a warning or require a supervisor override. Because what if that step had backflushed labor and or materials tied to it? Now, not only am I screwing up saying that I made 100 when I should have been 10, all the backflushed labor and material are coming out assuming that I made 100 when, again, maybe I made 10. So my raw materials inventory is messed up, and my costing is going to be messed up. It's going to require a lot of work to repair that misentered transaction, and it could also slip by, nobody catches it, it could really screw up really a lot of different things. The other thing that we can do here is we can define rules for different manufacturing facilities. So maybe I'm having labor entry errors only in a particular facility. I can define those rules specifically for that facility. And here are just some examples of the different types of rules and how you might want to implement them. For example, the first one here is a pretty good example, right? I want to look at my current efficiency percentage. So what this example is used for is to identify an inefficiency at the time of production entry based on the routing standard. So if it should take me 4 hours to complete a particular operation for a work order, and in this case I'm looking at less than 75%, so if I'm less than 75% of that 4 hours and I try to enter that transaction, it's going to say, wait a minute, there's no way you got it done this fast. I'm either going to warn you, require a supervisor override, or prevent that transaction from happening. Okay. The second one's another good example. Most companies operate in like 8-hour shifts. So I want to prevent anybody from entering more than 8 hours on any given labor transaction, because it's impossible. You don't work more than 8 hours. You know, if they fat finger another 8 in there or a different digit and they're trying to report 80 hours, you know, that's just impossible. So we're going to prevent that transaction from happening. We can do it on scrap. We can do it on hours to date based on the standard. We can do it on the maximum percent complete on all prior labor steps. We can actually evaluate that all prior labor steps are at least 50% complete before we post those transactions. More examples here. We can compare labor entries where a percentage of the prior labor steps should be marked as complete. So maybe I want to make sure that 50% or half of the prior steps were completed before I'm posting transactions for upstream operations. I can do it based on percentages of material issued. I can do it on outside process steps, and I can do it on a count of the previous material or outside steps where the quantity to date minus the quantity requirement, or for that routing, is a certain percentage. More of them that we have here. Again, these are available in our user guide, so if you want to review these in more detail to find out if they could fit some of the problems that you're having in your organization, we will make that guide available to you. and a few more here based on basically efficiency percentages and scrap. So this is what it looks like when you have an actual rule violation occur. In this case, this is a warning, so it's going to pop up and say, hey, you violated this rule, which means that your labor was greater than 10% of the value that we expected based on the routing standards. Do you want to continue saving this transaction or not? I can click yes in a warning situation, or click no, go back and correct that information, and then reprocess. Or again, it would come up and require a supervisor to put in their credentials and override and allow that transaction. Or it could say, look, this is not going to happen. You're way outside of the norm. We're going to prevent this transaction altogether. The labor validation rules are integrated throughout not only the Sage 500 system, but also within our E2B Anytime 500 suite of products, really anywhere that you're entering labor entry. That could be in the batch grid labor entry, which is part of this module. It could be in the Sage shop floor module, which allows you to do start and stop job entry. So I'm going to start a job and then log out of a job. Well, what if I forgot to log out and I'm trying to stop the job the next day? It's going to say, look, you've got to correct this transaction because there's no way that you worked for 16 hours or 24 hours or what have you on this transaction. Obviously integrated with the Sage labor entry screen, which is part of the advanced manufacturing module, as well as our E2B batch process production screen. Another piece of this product is the ability to enter your labor into batches. So a couple of reasons for this. It used to be that there were system performance issues when you were processing a lot of labor transactions in Sage 500. Sage has since fixed them in subsequent releases, so that's really not an issue anymore. But you may want to have labor tickets entered into a batch and have somebody review them just to make sure that everything looks good and you're not putting bad data in, and then process those transactions. This is another big reason why you might be interested in this application, and that has to do with grid data entry. So if I'm doing after the fact data entry, maybe I'm giving job tickets to my employees, they're going out on the shop floor, they're performing labor, entering the information on their job tickets, turning them in at the end of their shift, and now I have somebody doing data entry that has 100 or 200 job tickets to enter. Without grid entry, they have to go into labor entry, do one at a time, and wait for it to process before they move on to the next one. And it's really not conducive to this type of data entry, where a grid is. So I can just take a job ticket, go to my first row here, enter that transaction, tab down, start the next job ticket, and then keep going until I have them all entered. We've also put in some defaults here. So if I have an employee ID on, let's say, the first row, which is employee ID 150, when I tab down to the second row, it's going to default and assume that I'm entering a job ticket for that same employee. Okay? Or I can change it. We also, if it's the same employee, will default the end time from the previous row to the start time of the next row, assuming that maybe the employee was working on multiple jobs that, in one shift. So I'm working on this job from 8 to 9, I tab down, next job ticket, oh, the same employee, so I'm going to say from 9 to whatever that stop is on that next job ticket. So it really streamlines a lot of the data entry, for after-the-fact production reporting. The other advantages to reporting in a batch, I can get a labor efficiency for that batch, so I can find out really by shift or by day, what was my efficiency? And that's something that you really can't do out of the box. I can also get a report, a register and post report, that shows me all the labor transactions that were part of that batch. Pricing and availability, it's based on our E2B Anytime 500 product editions, which are different than the Sage editions. We have 5 of them: Small Business, Standard, Professional, Advanced, and Enterprise, based on the number of Sage System Manager users that you have registered to your account. Prices range from $3,000 for our Small Business to $7,000 for our Enterprise edition. The Enhanced Labor Entry module is part of our Anytime 500 Manufacturing Suite and our Anytime 500 Supply Chain Suite. It is one of our oldest products. In fact, it is our oldest product, and is available from Sage 500 ERP version 6.2 and anything beyond that up to the current release. So that's going to conclude our webinar today. I encourage you all to transform your business. Contact me if you would like more information about enhanced labor entry. You can also go to e2banytime.com and go to the Anytime 500 product page. There you can watch an overview video of enhanced labor entry and our other products. You can also get a spec sheet or a product brochure with more details about this product. If you would be interested in the user guide, which again has a lot more explanation on how to potentially implement this solution, contact me and I will definitely go ahead and get that to you. So that's going to conclude our webinar, and I'd like to thank you all for taking time out, and we will see you on our next edition of Lunch Bites.